I want to share with you a simple method of how to check the quality of your oil in your vehicle, motorcycle, lawnmower, tractor, anything that has oil in it, whether it's engine oil, hydraulic oil, or transmission oil. This method will work to help you determine if the oil is still serviceable or if it needs changing. This method is called the Blotter spot test. It's a way people used to check oil samples before there was oil testing labs. And the best part of it is it's basically a free test that you do at home. To perform this test, you need to get the engine oil warmed up in whatever you're testing it in, whether it's vehicle or mower or whatever. You need to take it for a drive or operate it for 15 to 30 minutes to get the oil warmed up and mixed up well. After the engine's warmed up, you will get a piece of printer paper and bring it out to your vehicle and remove the oil dipstick and drop one drop of oil on the center of the piece of paper. Keep the paper level with the drop of oil so it doesn't just run down the paper. You want the oil to try to stay in the same spot and disperse out in a circular pattern like you'll see in the pictures in this video. The paper also needs to be elevated off of the level surface that it's sitting on so the oil doesn't wick through and get on the surface and mess up the sample. So you can take like two bamboo skewers and set the paper on those so the oil sample and the bottom of the paper is not touching. The samples need to set for 72 hours in order for the oil to wick into the paper and give you the most accurate reading of the condition of the oil. You do not need an entire piece of paper to do the test on. You can cut up pieces of paper 3 inches by 3 inches, which is large enough. And then if you bend up the ends of the paper like you see in this photo, that keeps the paper from warping down in the middle and touching the table. Well, that's the basics of how you do the test. So let's look at some of the samples that I've taken from my vehicles and evaluate those so you can see what you're looking for when you do your own samples. So the first sample you're looking at is from my push mower. This was run about 15 minutes. 15 to 30 minutes. You just want to get the oil warm and get it mixed up in the engine good so you can have a sample of what the overall oil looks like. So anyway, in this picture, the key indicator that this is very poor oil that needs changing is the dark black ring in the middle. That dark black ring is an indication of oil has oxidized and no longer is in good shape, and the contaminants in the oil are not dispersing out through the oil sample, hence the dark ring in the darker center section. So basically, if you see a bullseye ring in the middle or a darkened center, the oil is bad and needs to be changed. Holding the sample up to the light in the second clip there, you can definitely see that the center section is a bit darker than the outer section, and it has a very darkened ring around the center, all indications of bad oil. The same sample held against a white plate with no backlighting still shows a very darkened circle in the middle. This next sample is a sample of oil from my Honda CRF 450L with 250 miles since last oil change. And you can see this oil is very clear. There is no circles in the center, and it just looks like a drop of oil. That's what you're looking for. That's a good oil. There's nothing wrong with that oil. It's ready to go. The next sample is old oil out of my Jeep Wrangler TJ. This oil is over 2 years old. This vehicle doesn't get driven much, so it sits a lot. Not many miles on this oil, but the oil is just old. It may be 3 years old. I'm not exactly sure how old the oil is, but you notice in this one, once again, there's a ring in the center, a darkened brown ring on this oil, and that's indicating that this oil needs changing as well, because once again, that's what you're looking for is what does the center of your oil look like. That's the main key here. The next sample was taken from my 2000 Chevrolet Silverado with 5.3 LS engine. This is the worst sample that I have, and I'm not sure how old this oil is either, but it's less than 5,000 miles on it, but the oil's probably 2.5, maybe 3 years old. And these vehicles have very short drives on them. The motor vehicles, not the motorcycle, but the cars have like 20-mile round trips on them. So that's hard on oil as it is. But you can see with bright light behind this one, it looks really bad. Against the plate, you can really see how dark that center ring is. I mean, that's like a bullseye. That's really bad. The pencil marks on the outer edge are the lighter band of color versus the center band. You've got the darkened center, the more yellow next band, and then the very outer band is about the same color of the paper. That's an indication of fuel dilution, which you see on most oil samples like this, especially as they have some miles on them. That's normal to see a little bit of fuel ring, a light ring on the outside. The next sample is from my Yamaha MT-07 motorcycle. This is a 2018 model. This oil was changed last on 8/31/2019, and this sample was taken on March 31st of 2021. And this is Rotella T4 15W40 oil, and current mileage on the oil is 2,281 miles. So it's pretty old oil with moderate miles. This bike has a I think it's 4,000 mile recommended oil change interval. As you can see, this oil sample is good. It's a little bit darker than the car, but then again, this is a wet clutch application, so I expect the oil to be a little darker. But the key thing here is the oil is uniform. There's no rings in it. It just looks like a drop of oil. Now under the light, you can see a slight ring to the center, but if you notice, the overall color of the oil is the same across the spot. So the center is not darker, even though it has a very slight ring, and you have to hold it up to the light just right to see that. So this oil should be watched. I mean, probably every 500 to 1,000 miles, it might be a good idea to check it, just look at it again and make sure, but it's still in good shape and doesn't need changing. The next sample is from my 2018 Toyota Camry 2.5, which is a dual injected engine, meaning that it has a direct and port injection. You can see some fuel dilution, like an outer ring. You should be able to see where the yellow oil sample kind of fades into a very thin, clearish ring around the outside. That's the indication of fuel dilution, which is more common with direct injected engines. But this oil sample is 7,200 miles, and the oil might be a year and a half or a year old. I'm not sure when I last changed it, but and this is Mobile 10W20. So as you can see, this oil is in very good shape. No indication of any kind of rings whatsoever in it. The sample looks darker against the paper, but still, as you can see, there's no rings in the oil indicating that it is still good. And the camera actually makes this look darker than it looks in person. So now you see that the test is pretty straightforward on how to evaluate your oil. Basically, if your oil is dark in the center or has a ring in the center, the oil's, needs changing. Oil change intervals are recommendations by the manufacturer. They're not set in stone. Your oil may last 5,000 to 10,000 miles, or it may not. It just depends on how long it's been in the vehicle and what kind of driving you do. Most manufacturers recommend changing the oil yearly if you don't meet the recommended oil change interval. So if they call for 7,500 miles, if you only drive it 5,000 miles that year, they still recommend changing it once a year. Oil will last over a year, as you've seen in the example from my motorcycle. So oil life just varies by how the vehicle's been used over that period. The color of the oil on your dipstick does not indicate whether you need to change your oil. New oil darkens pretty quick due to exposure to heat, so that's not a good way to judge oil. So if you're not sure if your oil needs changing, just go out and do your blotter spot test and look at the oil sample on the third day and see if it looks like one of these samples. And if it's got any kind of center markings that are pronounced, change it. If not, you can keep on using it. Well, I hope you found this video useful and hopefully it can save you some money on oil changes in the future. Well, that's all I've got, so thanks for watching.